Hello, welcome to my channel and welcome to my personal library, however modest of a library it might be. So this is my introductory video where I will briefly introduce myself and where I'll talk about why I'm creating these videos and what my vision and my plans are for this experiment of mine, this kind of book chat or book review channel. Anyway, and without further ado, my name is Bill and this is Poor Yorick Entertainment, here to deliver some hopefully entertaining book reviews. I will start with a little introduction to myself. Basically and simply, I am a book lover, a bibliophile, one who loves perusing quaint old bookshops, reading over copious amounts of coffee at local coffee shops or here at home in my home library. And I also just love chatting about books. So my personal relationship with books and with literature goes back somewhere around high school. Around my high school years. I remember being in grade 11 and my English teacher read T.S. Eliot's The Hollow Men to us. And I remember I was completely blown out of my seat. Like, wow, this T.S. guy, he's got me here. There's something about it that just kind of gripped me. And yes, perhaps this kind of poem works especially well for those dark, edgy days of high school that we all lived through. But yeah, so this poem really did land with me. Around this time, my interest in other literature was taking off in all kinds of different directions and into philosophy as well. And then I remember the following year, the same English teacher read us Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And just to my disbelief, I was even more blown away than I was with The Hollow Men. So yeah, late high school years, interest in literature, philosophy, which was also being enhanced by other influences like music or film. And then immediately after high school, I studied a little bit of literature and philosophy at college. However, my life took a bit of a different non-related sidetrack. Fast forward a few more years, I decided to return to the school to complete a bachelor's degree in literature, philosophy, and history. I completed this degree nearly 2 years ago now, and really I just miss it. I miss being in that academic environment, constantly around people who are reading and who are into reading the same or similar things, similar topics, having discussions about these topics and about these works. And so now that I don't really have that environment around me as much anymore, I decided to start this channel as a way of starting some kind of community of book discussions, perhaps, albeit a digital community, a kind of community which is very new to me, but which I'm experimenting with and trying out here. No, I am not, nor do I pretend to be an academic scholar or an expert on literature, philosophy, or on any of the topics one might find on this channel. I like to talk about my own ideas about these works, to share my ideas, and perhaps sharing the ideas of others. With this, it is possible that some of the things that come out of my mouth might be mistakenly incorrect, or some of you might disagree with. Luckily, there are comment sections on YouTube, and so I would encourage you to respond to these instances. Please correct me if I'm wrong, or share your counter ideas, your counter arguments, even if it's a simple correction, like something like a mispronunciation, or if it's something larger than that. By any means, whatever it is, feel free to correct me. I know YouTube might not be the best way to do it, but I do feel that there is a potential for some two-way discussion, two-way discourse, two-way conversation perhaps between myself and all of you. so comments are much appreciated. I'm here simply to discuss books, to engage in my passion for books, and to deliver some form of book reviews, with the hopes of sparking discussions on these topics and also perhaps to influence or to introduce these books to others. Of course, I love the ideas, the spark of the imaginative that books create or have the potential to create, but also the practical spark. They start in the imaginative, but it allows one to ponder life and the world around us as we are living in it. And to ponder maybe other potential ways of living in the world, of being and becoming in the world, new ways of understanding the world in which we live so that we can think up ways that perhaps work better for us, both on an individual level and a societal level. So what kinds of literature can one expect to find on this channel? What kind of literature does Poor Yorick Entertainment endorse? So my reading interests span from ancient literature to contemporary, modern, or postmodern stuff. Ancient works from the Greeks, Romans, Mesopotamian myths and stories, but especially ancient Greek. From Homer and Aeschylus and Sophocles, Empedocles to Heraclitus, Plato, Aristotle, and others. And for philosophy and also the literature of the ancient Greeks, it's amazing how much of our current topics of discussion and debate have their at least literary origins in this kind of Greek philosophy, from the nature of human will to morality, and talks about justice, how to create the best community, or how to live our best life. These are things and discussions and arguments and questions raised by these early Greek philosophers, but they also find their way into the literature of the time, of the period, and going forward up to the present day. So the poetry of Homer, for instance, you can find a lot of these, or the talk about justice in Aeschylus's Oresteia trilogy. So beyond this ancient literature, I'm also interested in the progression of Western literature from this point moving on. So the history of literature and philosophy in general, medieval literature from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales to the wonderfully lewd, wild, grotesquely hilarious fabliaux of 12th and 13th century France. Then there's also Boccaccio's The Decameron and Dante's Divine Comedy, of course. So it's fascinating from a historical perspective, reading these older works, seeing the language and the thought and the different ways that society functioned in these times and places, but at the same time, it's fascinating to see the level of those universal elements as well in these works. There are themes and feelings discussed, problems, individual and societal problems that remain problems for us today, questions that remain unanswered today. And then moving on some more, there's of course Shakespeare, who again spans such a vast array of discussions around these similar topics as well, these universal human problems and questions. And of course the very name I decided upon for this channel is at least somewhat taken from Shakespeare, from Hamlet Act 5 Scene 1, where Hamlet famously upholds the skull of the dead jester Yorick. This is, of course, the memento mori scene in this play, as most of Shakespeare's tragedies contain some variety of a memento mori. And memento mori is, of course, these fatalistic mementos, a remembrance of our impending death, a reminder that we are not immortal, that we will one day perish. So it's some kind of inspiration to get out and do something with your life. Now, what to do exactly with that life, that's where it gets complicated and up for discussion, and where the pondering of great literature perhaps comes in hand. Now, so the title of this channel was also and more directly taken from a David Foster Wallace novel, of course, Infinite Jest, where one of the characters in the novel, a filmmaker, uses a production company called Poor Yorick Entertainment. So yeah, that's where the title's coming from. There's nothing really deep behind it beyond that. Oh well. And yes, by the way, there will be a review, an episode coming out on Infinite Jest shortly, so stay tuned for that. Now let's move on a little bit more into the more modern era. I'm interested in the period of modernism. So typically speaking, the early 20th century, around the 1910s to the 1930s. I am interested in how this period came about. So going back to the 19th century, especially 19th century France, French literature, writers like Baudelaire, Flaubert, Rimbaud, Mallarmé, Huysmans, and then also notably some Russian literature, authors that interest me as well, like Nikolai Gogol or Dostoevsky, Turgenev, Tolstoy. So yeah, I'm interested in how these literary movements from the 19th century, like realism and naturalism and symbolism and the decadent movement, and mixed in with this deep psychological focus of much of these writers, that much of these writers use. How did this period shift into the modern? These periods as cultural reflections of the day and age and the problems plaguing this day and age. How were these movements still clinging to those older Enlightenment ideals, the ideals of human progress and reason? And then how does literary modernism respond to these questions, to these problems? Artistically, how does the modern period differentiate from those 19th century movements? Key writers that interest me from modernism include still T.S. Eliot to some extent, but also James Joyce, Marcel Proust, Virginia Woolf. Mrs. Dalloway is probably one of my favorite novels out there. And then also others like Robert Musil and Italo Sfivo or Bruno Schulz and Witold Gombrowicz. And then I'm also interested in how philosophy has influenced this modernist period, the period's aesthetics and art, right? The philosophy of its art, also just the ideas of modernism. Thinkers from the Enlightenment era like Immanuel Kant to Hegel in the 1800s, and then of course Marx and Nietzsche, their massive influence on the 20th century. And then of course there's Freud. And then more recently, my interests in literature have begun to span beyond modernism into the responses to modernism, into what we would typically call postmodern, the postmodernism, or whatever other isms you want to classify this period that we're currently living through, roughly the period from the end of World War II to the present. Writers like Thomas Pynchon, William S. Burroughs, Don DeLillo, David Foster Wallace. So my main focus ultimately for this channel will be more towards modern and postmodern literature. I might also include some works of the 19th century or even before that, possibly considering how these earlier writers perhaps influenced modernism or postmodern art, culture, society, the ideas that we're currently living with. At the end of the day, this is all an experiment for me. I've never done anything like this. I am the furthest thing from a social media guru, but I am trying here. I'm hoping this will be fun, both for me and for people watching. I hope people out there can get something from it, whether it's entertainment, engaging discussions and ideas, or just suggestions for new books to read. So that will conclude this introductory video presented to you, the viewer, by none other than Poor Yorick Entertainment. Stay tuned for upcoming reviews and riveting book chats, my friends. Poor Yorick Entertainment, out.